I'm Steve, and I want to thank you so much for watching this two-part conversation with Graham Petragrosa. We talked for about 2 hours about some content about racism and specifically trying to focus on Canada and what that's like. We talk about the government, we talk about, because he actually works in government, we talk about just his own experiences, and I believe it's a value-adding conversation. And so, check it out. Again, it's 2 parts, and so it's going to be kind of abruptly cut off about halfway through. So if you're catching either half of that, then you'll know kind of why you're either just jumping into a conversation or the conversation just abruptly ends. Enjoy. I'm just thinking, like, and again, this is actually just me being curious.
Yeah.
Does that actually mean that there's actually maybe potential for more problems in the future in Canada than in the States?
No, because I don't think so because we've had such a celebration of these communities and recognition from our political leaders from all parties. You have to understand in the States, in Canada, the first non-person of color to be like a first person of color to be elected to the House of Commons was a like a Chinese Canadian who was conservative,
Hmm.
right? And you look at there's a lot of firsts for a lot of, uh, people of color in different parties. And in Canada, we have a political system that celebrates, um, you know, that elects, like we're a team, right? You don't have Congress, we don't have Senate, we don't have an executive. We have, we elect people to the Commons, and these parties recognize communities and conservative and people, and they have, um, they've been recognized. I mean, it's not uncommon you see a conservative politician in Canada, talk to the Muslim community, right? And
Yeah.
right, but a conservative American politician, I don't think would ever set foot in speaking with a Muslim community in their community simply because there's that fear that you know we're we're talking to other communities and stuff. I think we celebrate it more, we recognize it more,
Mhm.
compared to in the States where it's kind of like, well, they haven't really assimilated to the American values of it, right? So that's why I think instead of melting, we have Canada's Canada's multiculturalism has been a more of a mosaic. Um,
You worded that really well. I just
yeah.
want to say that you
Oh,
worded
thank
that
you.
extremely well.
Thanks. Yeah.
Um, okay, so then, which again, this is one of our questions I sent you in advance, right? So
Yeah.
how do we celebrate our differences? You've talked about that, obviously, that the politicians are actually doing a fairly good job at it.
Yeah.
So specifically, maybe thinking of the church at large, thinking just in the country in general. How do we celebrate each other's differences without going into that prejudice, into the racist territory? Like, what does that look like? And the reason why I ask is because, as again, like if you remember back in high school, and we were going to Overflow together,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? You had the Asian mobile, and
Oh yeah. You were the white
and I
driver.
was the one white guy in the
Yeah.
car, and there was
Yeah.
all these Asians, and so I became the honorary Asian, right?
Yeah.
And so some people would consider that completely offensive. Me, I don't care,
Yeah.
right? Like I
Yeah.
don't care about race, so I just thought it was absolutely hilarious. Um, and because we were just driving, I think it was like it was a red Hyundai.
No, 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 no. It was a Ford Fiesta.
Was a Fiesta. That was it. Ford
Ford
Fiesta.
Fiesta.
Yeah.
Every time I see a Fiesta, that's literally what comes back to me. I'm like, have you ever seen 5 big guys in a little car? That
Yeah.
was the car.
And yeah. And then yeah, that was so funny.
Yeah.
And then also thinking of when we went to Ukraine together
Yeah.
and you dressed up as Psy.
Yeah.
Not because you were Korean, but because you were Asian, and you nailed it. Obviously, like
Yeah.
you did such
Yeah.
a good job
Sure.
impersonating, right? So what's the difference between celebrating our differences versus, um, yeah, going into that prejudice, into the racist territory? What does that look like?
Well, I think we I think there's celebration, and I think when going back to the church, uh, church communities that I have been a part of has been a really good forum to discuss and racial differences, but as well as discuss um, racial, to celebrate racial differences amongst people. I mean,
Shout out to
I
Bethel Sarnia.
yeah, 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 sure. But at the same time, like not everyone, you know, is a Christian. But I was I had and there's always the critics that Christianity has been part of the colonialism of this and that in the Philippines, and there's always that debate. But growing up, my family was uh, Pentecostal. We were the first Pentecostal branch in my family, like Protestant branch, to actually leave the Catholic faith, because the Philippines is a very um, Catholic uh, based country, right? But my grandmother made the decision in the late 70s to leave the Catholic Church and be Protestant. It was a big deal in my family back then. But I think that when we wanted to celebrate, our heritage and our background, the church has always been, in my personal experiences, a way to celebrate our culture. I mean, there were days we had, I the most I've seen in, other than school, especially living in Sarnia, to see a multicultural community was at the church I went to. And the church I grew up in, right? We had people from Nigeria, we had people from South America, we had people from Asia, we had, some of my one of my best friends who I grew up with is a Sri Lankan heritage. I still, me and him, I call him my brother. We met. I don't remember meeting him at church, because we grew up in the nursery basically together, right? So I mean, we have always, and there were times in the church where I was able to go to church in Filipino garb, Filipino, um, a Filipino attire, or we're able to put the Filipino flag. This was years ago, a flag of the Philippines in the sanctuary. I mean, those were kind of the things to say that, like, we are a multicultural, community. And I think that, in Canada or in our other countries, we celebrate. We can find, celebration, and it's all about just like being able to meet people in, those communities, and listening. I think listening is a big, big, big deal when it comes to, like, um, big deal as into how do we discuss racial differences amongst other people. Like, I when I work at Queen's Park, right, I have a friend who is of uh, Caribbean, Jamaican, you know, Caribbean descent, and he's black, and we've been friends. We basically are like Queens Park buddies. We like started at the same time. We did this, and like we talk on the daily about politics and racial issues. But the thing is like the key thing that that's made me as a Filipino guy and him as a black guy who's grown up, who were both born and raised here, is that we're able to listen to each other's experiences, not only the bad experiences they've gone, but like, what are some of the good things, you know you feel in you've done to celebrate your culture. I think there's times where I think a lot of second gen, like, I'm in a weird spot because as a second generation, a lot of people, especially second generations who live in white majority communities, they struggle with their identity a lot, because a lot of their friend groups are majority white. So they are kind of like, well, I'm basically white, right? And they kind of de like distance themselves from their own racial and heritage backgrounds. Like, I remember a Filipino person in Sarnia would not tell people she was Filipino. It was like, I'm Spanish. I'm like, I know your father. Like, I know your family. Like, stop faking that. Like, there's nothing wrong. Like, no one's like, but like, there's like where like some people are scared, but I think we have to be proud. We need to discuss. We need to have uncomfortable um, conversations, right? I
Mhm.
think I really believe that the protest that's happening right now and the continued discussions. I don't think this is going to be a overnight thing, right? This is going to be years of like this is generations, right? And this is just the time that I'm going through, right? But if it was like when my mom first came to Canada, she didn't feel well. Like she felt like it was nice, but like people always looked at her funny because she was one of the first Filipinos to live in Sarnia, right? So she was like, yeah, people used to call me exotic. I was like, well, people want to call you exotic. That's weird. That's a weird term to call you, like people to call you, right?
Yeah.
Right? Or like, and like my dad, my dad's always been like, my dad's janitor, right? And he's just like, I kind of like it because I don't have to socialize or just like I work nights, quiet, right? I stay out of trouble. It's great, but like, like, I know my dad when he was growing up, he was like a social butterfly, right? But like he was like in Canada, he just said sometimes people like look at, they just don't want to, I don't feel the same. It goes both ways, right? Like white people kind of are like, well, he's a little different. I don't know, but like my dad's like, well, I'm not used to like I grew up with Filipinos around me, right? So, and then their kid, you see their kids, and now like I go into the school system. I have friends who are all, and then if I have children one day, right? I don't, they're gonna have a much better experiences from the past experiences, right? So these conversations and these uncomfortable, like just continues to really set a example of how we can continue to be more celebratory of of race and a lot of things and a lot of the things is that we need to, and this is for for every for every race, that we need to find equal footing and also find a equal, there's more equal, and to not be scared of each other. I think that's the thing, because when people are scared, that kind of turns into anger, that turns into, and I think as much as we have like the African American, African Canadian community protesting right now, they're scared of police, right? And they're scared of institutions that have been predominantly run by white people for the last couple of generations. And that being scared turns into being defensive and being angry at this. And this is kind of the product of what's going on. And then in turn, we have a lot of white people basically scared of, black people because of looting and crime. And, there's
It's all a big
always,
cycle. Everyone's
yeah,
just
it's
being scared of each
scared.
other.
And because
Yeah.
people are scared, that scaredness turns into anger and defensiveness, and and yeah, in order for people to not be scared, you got to talk, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like a good relationship with someone. You're scared of something,
Exactly.
talk to
Exactly.
someone, but it's going to be the most awkward and uncomfortable
Yes.
situation
Yes.
you're going to have, but you need to have that conversation to move forward.
Yeah, and one of my big things is acknowledging the awkward.
Yeah,
Like Joanne Goodwin, right?
yeah,
Everybody loves Joanne Goodwin.
yeah.
One of the things that I've noticed is students, they never have a problem with her. And the reason why is because even though she jumps into all those old hymns whenever she's preaching and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
she's like, so this is for all the old people in the room. If you're young right now, you're going to be awkward and all that kind of stuff, and that's fine. This is for us, right? And all of a sudden, all the students are like, oh, okay, and they actually relax and they engage with the moment, right?
yeah, they think it's weird, they think it's funny, but they actually engage with the moment because you've acknowledged the awkwardness in the room. And so once you kind of get that out of the way, you can actually engage with what's going on.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I thank you so much for saying that. Now, because you work in Queen's Park, all that kind of stuff, I do quickly kind of want us to talk about Canada, Ontario specifically. What do you see the government doing to help with this problem of racism and all that kind of stuff? If there is a problem, right? Like I know that, or at least currently a problem, because I think we can all acknowledge in Canada that the real racial issue has been being between whites and the natives, and all of that awkwardness and all of that. So, because again, there is two sides to each story, right? And there absolutely has been injustices, and so. What's your take on this, right? Just the honest.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you brought this point up. I think in Canada we always kind of seem like we're the better country. Like we see the States and it's just an absolute mess. Like I'm not gonna be pro Republican or pro Democrat, but like you just see like blue state or red state, there's a riot, right? There's no the violence, people are looting, there's fires. Like you look at this and you're like, wow, like we've always grown up to see America as like this leading force, as a shining star in Western society, as that if you come to America, it's the American dream. You can, be wealthy, you can be, but Canada, it's always like, we're nice. It's a great place for opportunity. It's a great place to raise a family. And you shouldn't have, we're not as racist as the U.S. or like things, or we're better than the U.S. as we're not racist because we have so many different cultures in Canada, right? And I always counter that because a lot of people who tell me the same narrative come from cities, right? They come from Toronto, they come from Vancouver, they come from the most multicultural parts of Canada. But people forget that Canada isn't just 5 cities. It's your Lukens, it's your Sarnias, it's your Medicine Hat Albertas, it's your Abbotsford BC, right? It's a lot of, it's a big country, the same, and there's a lot where there's communities that aren't as multicultural, right? And a lot of people who I know talk about race, like minorities who talk about racism or stereotyping of racism, they come from a lot of these small communities, right? Because they aren't, like, there is no like the Filipino community, and I get called out for the Filipino community in Toronto because I don't speak Tagalog, and they're like, "Did your parents like not teach you?" I'm like, "Did you not go to Filipino school? Did you not go to, were your friends Filipino?" And I had to tell my parents, I was like, no, like my mom, like I went to school, I was the only Filipino guy. My friends were Filipino, right? My mom worked basically like the full day. Like I only saw my mom like during nights because she worked like long hours, and like both my parents worked long hours. So like I understand a little bit, but like no one gave me formal education on my main language because I never had to use it in in but in Toronto, like if you're Filipino and you just want to hang out with Filipino people, there's a whole community out there in Toronto, right? You can, and
So do you
but
feel kind of like a black sheep that way?
no, I just
Okay.
think that I never felt like I was like this is who I am and I'm proud for it. I think there's like my brother definitely is having a weird uh, reflection on it, and I had that reflection too. Like, am I like a weird Filipino guy, or? But I like that might defective. Like, what happened? Like, why is not like you had to have that, you had a weird conversation about this to yourself, and like you
Yeah.
talk to your parents. Like the sad part is that my at one point my brother came up to me and he's like, "Hey, I wish I was just white." probably solve a lot of our problems. And I literally had to like sit him down and I was like, listen, man, like we have to be proud of who we are. Like as much as
Yeah.
there are barriers that have pushed us, like we want to continue to break those barriers and we want to make it better for like it doesn't stop here. Like I hope one day you find, you know, the love of your life and then you have children, right? But you can tell your children and the people and the children you have that you went through this proudly, right? Right? Saying that you just want to be white so you can, you know,
Make life easier.
it just feels like you're giving up, you know,
Mm.
like like we had we have the opportunity in Canada to have a post-secondary education to to be to study to question to you know without and there's a lot of things that yeah maybe we don't have that other people have, but I think it's important that we celebrate you know what we are, you know what you know who we are, what we are, and the way and how we got here and how
Yeah,
we.
which I would just like to point out,
I
though.
know we're going off topic to the
We
government
totally
thing,
are,
yeah,
but
yeah,
I just want to say, though, this is just kind of a acknowledgement back to one of the things that I've been wrapping my mind around to is the idea of privilege and what does that actually mean. And
yeah,
so the fact that Kent and yourself admittedly struggled with this, thinking like it'd be easier if I was white, right? In our culture in Canada, right? That does propel that idea of privilege, right? So
yeah,
it gives us that understanding, it gives us that framework to say that like because I'm white in Canada, sure, white privilege. It's not, but it's just privilege, right? So
yeah,
we want to be privileged. We want to
yeah,
have that position. So it's just one of those things where we're just acknowledging it.
yeah.
Um, but
But
again,
continuing on just the government side, just get
yeah,
back
that's what I was going to
on
say.
topic. I think Canada has been like, oh, we have been better than the Americans, and we don't have this. But in reality, we have such a history of racism in our country. I mean, I did a whole paper on the Chinese head tax when Chinese people were immigrating here to the West Coast in BC. The first government of Canada and the Liberal and other and subsequent governments put a head tax on immigration for only Chinese people. And you know, Viola Desmond, who is on the new $10 note in Halifax in the East Coast, there was a lot of African Americans who fled to Canada through the Underground Railroad.
Which shout out to Lucan
Yeah,
was the final stop.
there you go. And I mean, which is great, but the African Americans who came to Canada, they still didn't feel welcome in Canada. Um, the Viola Desmond, if you don't know the history, she was a businesswoman in Halifax, and she wanted to watch a movie, and so she bought a ticket and sat in like the regular, not the balcony. There's a balcony and a regular, and she got kicked out because she was black because the white people did not want a black woman to watch a movie with her in the front, and she was like basically like I bought my ticket. I'm a businesswoman. I'm from here. I'm born and raised in in Canada. I have every right as the next person here, right? So we have we have like that. Um, we have stories like that. We have you know people who are immigrate who are there's this whole like immigration. Um, this thing happened in the election that we had this CBC report of Roxham Road. I don't know if you heard about Roxham Road. There was this crossing in Quebec of Haitian refugees from America who wanted to come, and even Nigerians who came, but they were predominantly black, black people who wanted to come to Canada because of the States, and their visas were ending up, and they didn't want to go back to their home country because it was poor and it was restricted, and they wanted opportunity. So they illegally crossed Canada by breaking the law. Like I get it, but the majority of them, what the people see, they were all black, right? So there's that stereotype of like we don't need like I understand we want to have fair immigration laws. I am for a right to citizenship by all means, but I mean the narrative that came from, and this is mostly, I'm conservative, but like conservative circles were like, the first thing that came out was it wasn't they're breaking the law. It's like we just don't want black people to come to Canada, and this was like
Really?
modern. Yeah, yeah. It
Really?
wasn't.
Wow.
Yeah, it wasn't.
I personally never heard
Yeah,
any of that. I was
yeah,
more hearing the they're breaking the law. That's everything that I personally heard.
yeah, yeah,
But I mean, within your circles, you're
yeah,
around totally different groups of
yeah.
people, and so that blows my mind.
Black, and as well as the whole like Syrian refugee, because they weren't Christian per se.
Yeah.
I mean, just because it scared people, right? And that's that, and they were brown. I mean, there's like that, and there's that whole thing when I talk to brown Christians, right? And people are like, we don't want any Muslims here, and literally they have been Christian for generations from the
Yeah.
Middle East, and they're like, what are you talking about?
And
Like,
for some of them, that's actually why they're leaving.
yeah, exactly, because they're persecuted Christians in the Middle East. But you have this white community that's like, we don't want Muslims here. But you're looking at it as like, are you saying you don't want Muslims here, or you don't want brown people here? Because those people are Christian people, right? So it was like, there's the prejudice of that, and we have that discussion. I think um, going back a lot, like if you ever have this historic conversation, Canada was always talking about how there was was much better than America, like this U.S. versus Canada thing, because one of the rhetorics back in the day when we were British subjects, like we were like proud to be British, people were like, oh, the U.S. has so many problems, like black people and fighting black people, and it wasn't because we were doing anything, but because they had a proportionately larger black population in the States. But Canadians thought that was a problem in their country. That's why we were so much better. It wasn't because we were not racist, right? It was because they had black people there and we didn't, right? So I think we have to have those like contemporary Canadianism is like, yes, we have it. We are a multicultural country. We are great. We have liberal populism in here. So everyone's like, we can, but we need to discuss like, we need to discuss that this isn't a one party issue. This is a society issue as a country, that we can't just kick, racism. Yeah, we need to have to acknowledge the history of it. I think a lot of I think our governments are putting in more programs in place that will fund organizations to help communities and have advocates for community for racialized communities and diverse communities. Diversity. The Ontario government just put in a $1.5 million plan to tackle racism in Ontario. They have a youth council with like a premier's council, and they're trying to get applicants of communities from Black communities, and as well as other communities, to come together and talk about and have these uncomfortable conversations in front of the premier. Mm-hmm. I think that's good. I think that we're recognizing that the leaders of our country are recognizing the privilege they have. I mean, we have something called the Laurentian elite. It's a historic term of like people who have been, they're usually white. They've been here for generations. They have this wealth, and now they're political leaders. So like Trudeau is one because his dad was the prime minister, and they, long family. Doug Ford is another one. His dad was an MPP, a businessman. So like, these are second generation politicians as well.
Mm.
So we're having this acknowledgement of this acknowledgement uh, of racism. I mean, you compared that to the U.S. And I'm not gonna to try to hit on Trump too much or talk about the Trump narrative, but to have, like, there are leaders there that have been calling out for more law and order, but not addressing like humility amongst what's going on. And I think this is a time where our leaders need to show a little bit of humility and listening to our to our to problems that are happening in our society. I think that's a big thing. Governments have been have apologized for a lot of things that had happened with racial events that have happened. I know the Harper government apologized about residential schools during that time, and that was, yes, a profound event, because like there's like the last residential school closed in 1996. I was alive when that happened. Like I was one. So I think we need to do more. We need to apologize, but there are communities that are like, we want the same economic, a lot of these communities, like, we want the same economic freedoms and the same economic opportunities that we have never that we haven't had the opportunity to do so, right? So when Doug Ford goes up to the north and talks to the chiefs there, what's the thing they want? They want wealth. They want the same wealth as everyone in Toronto or in whatnot. So there's that thing.
Everyone wants the same wealth that's in Toronto.
Yeah. Yeah, but they want to have, like, they want those opportunities, right? They want to open it up. They don't want to like live in no one wants to live. I hope no one, but like no one wants to live in a place where the running water is like dirty and that's, so they want to have those conversations. And I think that and I was talking to I wasn't talking, but there's the guy who was Jamil, who's trying to run the Premier's Council, and he was at the press conference, and he was like, I honestly just want to have like we have, like, the Black community just hasn't had the same opportunities as like, we want the same chance to be employed as much as the next white guy, and we want to have, there's been ties of being racially, like, he said it elegantly, as in, we could talk about racism and how to fix racism, but we also want to have the talk about how can we both tie it into the economic prosperity for our communities as well, because we're having these problems where we've been so demoralized over racial inequalities and racialized prejudice in our communities, that we just don't have we want to have the same opportunities to go to post-secondary. We want to have the same opportunities to compete in the job market, right? We want to, in a way, so and be respected.
So would you say, just so I can kind of follow up with that, just to understand, right? Would you say that there's actually inequality, like real inequality,
in the job markets, and then like economically?
Yeah,
definitely.
Okay.
I think there is a and this is not just in the Black community. This is in the immigrant communities in our, like, for the first generation of someone who immigrated to Canada, right? They don't have the same like, first of all, the credentials of whatever they had is gone.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a guy in Listowel who he actually had, because he was from Iran. he was one of the refugees.
Yeah.
His job was reverse engineering planes.
Yeah.
Right. And then remaking them
Yeah.
in Iran. Right.
Yeah.
And he had all these degrees, but in Listowel, he's a taxi driver and like Uber driver actually. And I can't remember what else he was doing, but he was doing like 2 different jobs. And you're like, you're way smarter than this. Like,
Yeah, my mom is a certified registered nurse in the Philippines, but she's a PSW in Canada. My dad's a paramedic. He's a janitor in the federal government, which I still think he's a spy, but he's probably not. But I've always made the joke that he's like probably a spy. I don't know.
sweeping as he's looking at files.
Yeah, I don't know, or a secret agent or something. But, but like when if you're an immigrant or if you're in a situation where, so first of all, you start in socialized housing, and there goes a whole like 5 years. My parents lived in socialized housing for 5 years, 6 years, and socialized housing is supposed to be a place where you can get a step up to, a actual home that you can own and have, and my parents were able to work hard and have that opportunity to do that. And I know that we were very lucky, we were very blessed, but some people don't have those opportunities to have that situation. I know people who make um, who come here and they have basically nothing. So basically you use this, like their time, and time's a very important commodity, right? That a lot of people are wealthy, that they're just trying to say that I just want to say I made it, right? We made it, right? Well, right now we have it. We just got to work hard, put our head down, and just and put that opportunity. So I think when you look at like immigrant communities, there is a certain uh, inequality of wealth, and I think that the opportunities should be, there's the system has always, it's not perfect, but I think there's always ways to improve how we can, work and make social housing shouldn't be a band-aid solution. It should be more of a way that we can find opportunities and get people out of the cycle of poverty and things like that.
Yeah, it should be a stepping stone.
Yeah.
Because like one of the things that you're kind of touching on and is what I'm seeing anyway, or hearing, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is what you're saying is there is inequality. But one of the things that I kind of, and I could be wrong, but I feel like I'm hearing it, is that there is equal opportunity. You're just going to have to work really hard, right? Because equal opportunity doesn't mean equal effort, right? But like everyone does have the opportunity to step up. Everyone does have the opportunity to get out of their current economic situation. But it is unequal, right? And that's life, right? Like not everything's equal. It just doesn't make sense, right? So, and again, this is coming from a kid who, when I was little, right, my mom, she went to school full time. She had a part-time job at Zellers and was a single mom, right? And I mean, things drastically changed in our life when we moved to a cheaper area, so that helped a lot.
Yeah.
But then also because we moved from basically Colwood, which is just outside of Victoria, to Souk on Vancouver Island, and then my mom also married another guy who changed our financial situation. So, I mean, like, there's, again, equal opportunity doesn't mean equal effort,
right?
But it means equal opportunity.
Yeah, but at the same time, we could talk about the finances and the working part, all. But like I said, immigrant groups and Black communities still have to also not only work hard, but to jump past those barriers that have been put in place because of the history of racial stereotype, prejudice,
Mhm.
um, and racial prejudice, and like the institutions they have. I mean, we
So
talk.
so if I can ask you about that then. So what institutions currently exist that are a barrier for people of colors?
Um, and so basically, we're looking at misrepresentation of not misrepresentation. So one is the police in a way, not in like, we could talk about.
I'm thinking
We're
just
talking
in
about
Canada.
Canada. In
Let's try to
Canada,
keep Canada, yeah.
yeah,
Because we
yeah.
should stick to what we know the best we can.
Sure. Um, I think we do a much better job compared to the states, but I think we also need to also like the police has always been, uh, uh, we're getting better, but I think we need to continue to improve on it. But the police has always been a institution where we can improve. Toronto has done a great job at bringing community and especially constables and stuff like that in communities. But
Okay.
I remember going down, like living in Sarnia. Everyone knows about this street called Kathleen Avenue, right? And it was a mix of people in Kathleen Avenue. You had white people there, you had black people living there, you had divorced parents, you had single moms, you had
It's
uh,
very low income.
it's
Yeah.
very low income, and but there was also like drugs was a thing there. There was um, and like a stereotype that this was a high crime area amongst like the neighborhood around it. But like
Mhm.
if you went to like the nicer part of towns, everyone thinks, oh, Kathleen Block, you shouldn't go there at night, kind of thing, right? But everyone was always like, I had a friend who grew up there. It's like there's a police cruiser that comes down here like every hour,
Mhm.
drives through. It's like your 1 hour, suspicion and stuff like that. And I think that if you had a police officer that was like on a bike, talking to, someone from the community that knows the community instead of someone like
Just in the car passing through.
that passing through, right? I think those are 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 things that we can always bring. I think the welfare system in Canada has always been it's a very proud institution that we have, because it's like we can get people out of we're it's a social net, so people can have money to pay for food and groceries. And a lot of the welfare system is like more of, like I said, another band-aid solution to the cycle of poverty and racial inequalities, because people are just like, should we be just giving money so it's a band-aid solution so we can just keep doing this, or is there other ways that we can keep people accountable? How do we get people to use welfare in a way that it could be a stepping stone to success? Why are a disproportionate amount of people on welfare on this? My one friend who worked in the welfare department in government said to me that in welfare, the people who needed it the most never got it, and the people who did get it were the people who really didn't need it.
Mhm.
And that's a um, that's a huge thing in building it. Another thing I think in institutions is education. I think we've seen a lot of, especially in post-secondary education, like the accessibility to a college or a university. I think uh, we're doing it much better than the states for sure. But having um, being able to have those resources to be um, much more accessible, but as well as like a lot of people are like, when I go to university, I get my degree, and then I still don't get a job. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? How yes, we can bring more people, out of low income to university post secondary for sure, but we need to like follow up after they get the degree. Like, how can we make, are you getting a not as a cash cow? We've had so many educational systems, like institutions, and I can call them out, like Lambton College, that they just bring people in for money. They can raise international funding, and here's your degree, have a good one, take care. And they've spent like $30,000 on a degree or a diploma, and we're just kind of left them to be. But we all feel good that we gave someone of color a degree and diploma. But like, we need to make sure that education is not just like a a, a way to, you know, just give them a diploma in society, but as well as to give them the jobs. Because everyone says, because the reason people want to go into education is that there's a correlation between wealth and education.
Mhm.
Education.
So again, so I'm going to kind of ask a clarifying question. Do you think that right now, when it comes to the schools, the institutional problem is that they are promoting the people of color card, like, hey, we are super diverse, and they're doing it just for the placard. They're not doing it because they actually care about the people. Would you say that that's
I think that we're overcharging. Well, if we want to bring our best and brightest to Canada, and as well as like people who are part of, like, you know, the inequalities of like first or second generation racialized communities and stuff like that, um, going to a, you know, I think that schools have become more of a money grab and a place of privilege than it is a place of higher learning and education.
I'd agree with that.
There's a lot, like, I didn't get a master's. I don't want to get a master's degree simply because I feel like it's just more of a money grab. And I've just been talking to like lots of people to, you know, I'm happy where I am professionally, and you know, it just, and a lot of people have felt like where, you know, you're getting this degree, but are we looking at actual like economics? I was seeing an economic, like, I don't know why. I felt this when I was in the university. It's like the white guys always got jobs working at like the nice corporate internships, right? And like me trying to find an internship was harder. And I was like born here, but like, you know, because of like my color, like I worked at Best Buy for a whole year, right? And like I wanted to work in the government, right? And a lot of people were like, well, I mean, you don't represent, you know, you're Filipino, so how do you know anything about a white community? I'm like, well, I was like, you know, so
I got
intern,
1,000 votes shy in Sarnia of city
yeah,
council. Come
yeah,
on.
yeah. But like at the same time, you got to look at like you just saw that like at a university, the communities that were not like, though, like people just kind of were on like the like racial, like diverse like ethnic communities were still like getting the short stick in education. I
Mhm.
think that was the big thing, and I think we're doing much better, and but we need to recognize that we can do much better here in Canada, and we're improving that. I think, like I said, um, we're seeing humility from our leaders, but that's just one step to 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 working and having that. But listening is such an important tool
Mhm.
into building that. Yeah.
So, um, so that we can kind of wrap it up because we've been talking for quite a while now. This probably will become a two-parter.
Yeah.
What would you say are some practical steps between? How do I word this? Practical steps, not just for reconciliation, but for just reaching people from other communities, other skin colors, right? So,
Yeah.
like, someone who's Filipino moves to Lucan, someone who's black, or yeah, like whatever. Like, think of, you know what I'm asking?
Yeah. 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 And like Steve, you're on the right track of like asking questions and having uncomfortable conversations, and you know, reaching out to um, to people by yourself. I think it's important to listen. It's important to sometimes it's even better to just not say anything and just listen. Like not even like just and then think about it. I in no way speak for the Black community. I have my own experiences as a Filipino, and I'm sure the people that you'll be speaking to will probably have a vast, a probably better understanding of what it's gone through. A lot of people say, "Oh, Asians are not as bad as Black people when it comes to the racial divide because we've always had this model minority myth that Asians are smarter and they go to school and they have
They're
family.
being prejudiced.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. They have this one family unit, and it's that myth that I I even would I stand up to a lot of I stand with a lot of the beliefs of the Black community and their struggles and what they're going through right now, but it's better for me to just listen and and the people, and it's better, and I have, like I said, I have two friends who are Black who I trust wholeheartedly, and they are people that I want to listen to. I want to that it's okay for them if I question and I ask a stupid question. There's no such thing as stupid questions. Sometimes my questions could be stupid. It could be
There are stupid questions,
yeah,
but if it's coming out of a sincere place,
yeah,
it's not.
exactly. And literally it's about listening. I mean, I don't want to like I've come to a point where I we can have those discussions, and I think a lot of the noise, like the social media noise, that's you look on your Facebook wall, it's everything, but I think the most practical thing is having those uncomfortable situations, not on social media, but in person with people one-on-one in your community, right? When you hear something that just doesn't sound right, take them to the side, have a conversation with them, you know like I think there's more can be done um, to build relationships with people, how people dealing with other the people who look different than you or a different color than you. If we can all call it out in things. I made the analogy to my girlfriend. Hey, what does it feel like to be in a room with 10 white people? Right? Because the minute I walk into a room with 10 white people, I find it different if it wasn't with 10 white people, right? So if you're in those situations where okay, maybe you are all the same, but you guys are talking about race and stuff like that, I think it's important to have be able to discuss and not agree, but if something feels like it's uncomfortable, I think it's important to have that 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 call. It's hard. It's 100% hard to have those awkward conversations, but I think it's really important that there's a different a personal um, a personal distinguishment on a personal talk with someone. I know you're a parent. You have was it 2 daughters?
I do,
Two,
yeah.
right? 2 or 3?
Two.
Two. Yeah. So I think it's important to talk to your kids about it, right? There's child development is huge, and you're as a father, I'm sure you're responsible for them, and it's I'm sure you're having a great time being a dad. Yeah, and to just have conversations. I like to reference Mr. Rogers as one of my favorite child development things for parenting. I'm not a parent myself, but being able to just find that respect and that love for just people in general, right? And not to be scared. I mean, one of my favorite things about Mr. Rogers was like when there was a time when people were like black people weren't allowed to be in pools, right? And people were throwing bleach. He literally had a black person come in and they shared a kiddie pool and wash their feet together. And that's to just show that like we're all people. We're all like we all love each other. Like loving one another is probably one of the most important tenets. The Bible teaches us, and loving your neighbors and loving one another, and finding positivity amongst people, but also but as well as Jesus did call people out at the same time. So I mean, I always say like we can, if you can call them out, we can. It's important to not call them out publicly. No one likes to be called out publicly. No one likes to be shamed publicly, and that goes with anybody. I don't think anyone wants to ever be publicly shamed or something. But if we can talk and come from love and discuss from a one-on-one basis and have those personal conversations, I think it's really important. And to listen. Like right now, we have a narrative that it feels like, and you said in your email, like, right now it's kind of like, shut up, you're white kind of thing, right? And I don't think, I think that's where the noise comes from. But I think for someone who is white, I think the conversation is not, it's not shut up your way. I think it's listen, think, reflect, and then ask. I think that's kind of the key thing. I mean, it's sharing experiences as well. I mean, this is a great conversation to have, but I think when you're having these other conversations with people of the Black community, I think you're going to have a much more impactful talk, because they've gone through their community has gone through years of this in Canada and the US, and I think that's important. So yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Graham, I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate you doing this. Now, if you don't agree with this, I can edit it out. Is there a way that if someone has a question for you that they could reach out to you, or best way to connect with you or anything like that?
Yeah. Best way, it's my email. It's graham.pedregosa@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from anyone who is it. Like I said, I'm not the biggest expert in Black communities or the Black experience in Canada or the US, but
you are Filipino in Canada.
I am Filipino in Canada, and it's something that it's important to have those conversations. So yeah, feel free to email me, or and I can definitely get back to you as soon as possible. So
beautiful. Yeah. Well, Graham, you're an amazing guy, and that's why I wanted to connect with you. You were full of insight today. Yeah. And again, you helped frame things even for myself in some ways that I hadn't considered them before. Yeah. And so well done. Kudos. And again, just let me do a quick word of prayer and just pray God's favor over your life. Jesus, again, I thank you for Graham. I thank you for this conversation. I thank you that it was, if anything, helpful for me, hopefully helpful for anyone else that listens and engages with it. And that, Lord, you would, again, give Graham favor, give him favor with government, and whatever the next steps are that you have for him, that you want to use him in, that, Lord, not only would he succeed, but God, it would blow him out of the votes, or blow him out of the water. He would get 10 times the votes that he thought. And that, yeah, Jesus, you know what you want to do through him. So thank you for his life. Thank you for his courage in having this conversation. And as he continues to have these conversations, give him wisdom as well. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Have a great one, Graham.
Thanks, Steve. Take care.
All right. You have a good one. Bye.